All right, our final panel of the day, and then Fatima from Forrester will present, is led by Ryan Joe, our senior editor from AdExchanger. And the name of our panel is How Data Science and Technology Can Help Fight Ad Fraud. Please welcome Ryan and his panel. Come on out.
Thank you, John. So I am really excited to present to moderate the penultimate presentation here at CleanAds, how data science and technology can help fight ad fraud. So what we hope to suss out here is kind of give you guys an idea of some of the newest weapons that you could use to fight some of the newest weapons that the fraudsters are using. And also, maybe kind of outline where the ad industry still needs to do a little bit more work in fighting fraud. So I'll let my panel introduce themselves. We'll start with Michael down at the far end.
Hello, I'm Michael Tiffany. I'm the co-founder and CEO of WhiteOps, a security company making botnets unprofitable.
Cool. John Nitti, the Chief Investment Officer of ZenithOptimedia Worldwide. I basically oversee all media investment across our agencies in the US, as well as the technologies and analytics teams within each of our agencies.
And Douglas Jager, I head up a team at Google that hunts ad fraud botnets.
Great. So we'll dive right in, starting with you, Douglas. What are some of the newest challenges that you're facing that you've seen over the past year?
So probably the fact that we're having this conference. So I think if we think about the evolution really over the last few years, 2011 is when people started to think about fraud. It became a hot topic. Since then, I think there have been many problem anecdotes that get thrown up by various companies and vendors. I think we're at an interesting stage now where collaborative solutions are really coming to the fore. So these are actionable solutions, multiple parties in the ecosystem trying to address this problem. And I think that's the interesting stage that we're at right now. So if you think about what those are, step one is identifying bad actors. So there is an initiative that's currently being looked at by the IAB, the Transparent Supply Chain Initiative. And this is a way to ensure that bad actors that currently can hide can no longer hide. So if there happens to be someone who's buying inventory from an exchange, and there happens to be a daisy chain of middlemen, so a supply-side ad network, a sell-side platform, and then the publisher at the end, you'll have identifiers for each one of those. And as a buyer, you'll be able to identify all the actors that are selling this inventory, and you can be able to block these particular actors. The next step is the industry coming together to provide industry-wide blacklists. So if there happens to be a bad actor and some particular party identifies this bad actor, then other people benefit from this as well. The third stage beyond that is identifying the sophisticated threats. So once we've really identified the bad actors, we can actually mitigate those. The hard bit, I think, is the persistent, difficult threats, and that's really raising the bar, I think, for the whole industry. I'd like to reach a point, and I don't think it's hopefully that too far away, where people aren't talking about fraud. Fraud is really taken care of. And that's where we'd like to be.
Great. John, why don't you give us the agency perspective on what new challenges you guys have seen over the past year?
I think that as programmatic grows as a larger portion of our clients' overall investment, right? Not just in display, but in digital video, online video, mobile. But as you open up other media types or other inventory sources programmatically, it becomes a growing problem, right? I think part of the reason that bad actors have been able to get away with it is it usually on a client's media plan, it represents a relatively small percentage. But when you aggregate that, that's millions of dollars, on a daily or weekly basis. And so as long as it was a small percentage, people pushed it to the side and couldn't figure out the sequential liability in that daisy chain, right, that we spoke about. And I think that's what we need to expose, because as more and more dollars flow through within the mobile space, within terrestrial radio eventually, within linear TV and things like OTT, it's going to become a much broader issue with much broader exposure that we need to expose. And to your point, I think have more industry-wide initiatives that help call out those bad actors and sort of extinguish them before they get a chance to make more money off of our clients' budgets.
And Michael?
All right. I would say that we've gone through several stages, so I'll recap real quickly. First of all, there was not wide recognition of the problem for really quite some time, I think until the parasite grew big enough to start threatening the host. And at first it wasn't talked about at all, and we also went through a kind of fear stage where there was an open question as to whether we could talk about this fraud problem without admitting to untold liability. And I think we're just getting past that as it's becoming understood that the reason why fraud is such a big problem is because it's a very sophisticated crime. So it's not a problem of falling asleep at the wheel and just not being responsible enough. It's a question of being the victim of extremely sophisticated criminals, and that's okay. That doesn't mean that you were doing a bad job before. But if we look macroscopically, the world that we're trying to create is one in which no dollars are getting diverted to ad fraud, and certainly not to the level where they're financing cybercrime. And if we get to that point, it's not as though advertisers are going to be spending less money. So really what we're talking about doing is shifting ad dollars from the places that are attracting bots away from there into the places that are actually attracting an engaged human audience. And there's resistance to that because that's upsetting the status quo. By definition, the companies that are making the most money off of the status quo have the most money to spend to defend it. So now I think the industry has a case of to do something. Something must be done about this problem. The open question is, are we going to do the least in order to just kind of placate the audience while upsetting the status quo the least? Or are we going to take the steps that really direct those dollars in a big macro way, which means changing some of today's winners into losers and vice versa?
So is the solution technological, is it organizational, or some combination of both?
Well, it has to be both because the incentives are stacked against us. Right now, when the good guys win, when they find the fraud, they get to keep their stressful security job, and when the bad guys win, they make millions of dollars. They can bring a lot to bear on reverse engineering today's defenses. So that means expect a high rate of adaptability, expect creative reverse engineering, expect creative new attacks. The only way to undermine that is by changing business practices, because there's no technical adaptation you can build into the rootkit that is going to get around new language getting put into insertion orders. So business practice changes are actually more survivable and can have a bigger long-term effect than any incremental technical gain.
John, do you agree with that? And what sort of business practice changes need to be implemented?
No, it's definitely a mixture of ad tech and how much ad tech we deploy across different partners, and the human element of calling out those bad partners and actually putting dollars at risk unless they change their inventory procurement practices. So it definitely needs to be sort of the marriage of technology and the human layer of how we evolve through this. I think to Michael's point, it is an evolution, right? And if you think about any fraud, any security issue, banks employ people that were hackers, right, that did this for a living to protect their infrastructure, right? And I think it's incumbent upon our industry to do the same tactics, right? Whether it's deploying it through partners like White Ops or IAS or whoever it may be, or whether it's investing in that type of mentality from a publisher side as well, on the DSP and the SSP side, to better tighten up and ensure that there are less cracks, or at least we're evolving our securities and our process in order to more quickly expose some of these hackers.
Does Zenith employ people in-house to do
Yeah,
that
so it's
problem?
a combination of both. Obviously, we work across all of the ad tech and fraud protection partners, but we definitely have folks, both within VivaKey that work on our VivaKey verified product, as well as within ZenithOptimedia that sit there on a client level and establish whitelist and blacklist and continually evolve those on an ongoing basis, alongside with all the daily optimizations that they're doing to ensure that the campaigns are actually successful, but also obviously viewable.
Can you review how many people you have working on that specific problem?
Well, it is the interesting thing about the agency side of it. When now I have to employ PhDs and data scientists, things like that, and are inherently more expensive, right? And we're under a crunch from a fee standpoint where clients don't want to pay for that. But as soon as something goes wrong, we're held holding the bag as far as, if something ran fraudulent or ran on a pirated site, we're held sort of to providing them with the make it. So yeah, we have a team of 50 just within ZO that work on our ad technologies and platforms, both on the valuation side, but also on the ongoing optimization. And that is the fastest growing sort of team and hardest to also recruit for because they're such high in demand talent.
I want to touch a little bit on the, sorry, did you want us to add to that?
Yeah, I did. So I think there's a technical point now, and I think there are certainly companies for whom the technical point will be significant going forward. But I think in the first instance, it's organizational and infrastructure. It is across the whole industry. Today, the bar is very low. We're actually talking about fraud, but it isn't just fraud, it's illegitimate inventory. So crawlers, for example, that are crawling particular sites, potentially because the content on those sites, that content is good. So for example, eBay has auction bots. eBay actually tries to block these auction bots, and they masquerade as legitimate people, specifically to avoid detection by eBay. So eBay has high quality content. They're not trying to do bad things. They're actually doing a really good job. But the fact that they do a good job means that they raise the bar for these particular scrapers. But eBay's problem can be tackled, and I think there are many others. So for example, hidden ads can be tackled. Injected inventory, there are particular publishers that we can identify are supplying hidden inventory. So I think one of the things that needs to happen is we need to raise the bar. There are many categories of illegitimate traffic, fraudulent traffic that today are regarded as interesting. They shouldn't be interesting. They should just be taken care of by the whole industry, and we can actually do that. The point then is that there are interesting things, and it's specifically tackling malware, which is really difficult, and it is precisely the sort of thing that an agency shouldn't have to worry about.
Right.
And at that point, what we're actually talking about there is how do we collaborate the companies that are doing these interesting things and something that is technically challenging and will be technically challenging for many years to come. How do we share our insights so that as an industry, we work better together?
Well, then how do you share your insights so as an industry you work better together? What is the state of collaboration between you guys now?
Let me give the White Ops perspective. We entered into a crowded ad tech space with no ad tech background whatsoever. We're a security company. And I think that the reason why we were able to penetrate and make a dent and get a great deal of traction right away is that we're not trying to be another analytics dashboard to help you with optimization decisions. We're not going there at all. I hire hacker talent. I compete with nation states for that hacker talent. It's a really, really specialized game. And it feels like the kind of thing you should outsource. So we found that it's been fairly easy to kind of layer us into a variety of different contexts because we're functioning as the tip of the spear and providing very high level of evidence for making decisions that cut fraud out. And when you're built like that, then it can be a little easier to share information since my company is built based on the idea that we're being actively reverse engineered by global adversaries all the time, which means that we don't have to keep everything secret. We can be kind of open because if we're built for that level of adversary, then it means that we don't really have to worry about like commercial competition, which is actually substantially simpler. So that's been the basis of our collaboration. So that's ended up being across the spectrum from the sell side to the buy side to like various analytics companies.
Obviously, being on the agency side of it, we work across everybody and evaluate everybody's ad tech and platforms. Everybody has their own special sauce, right, that they don't want to give up. And I think that's where the non-sharing, the non-collaboration comes in, right? Because everybody has to have a point of differentiation, right, to ultimately sell their product overall. You also then have the platforms of whether it be an eBay, a Twitter, a Facebook, and whoever that want to also have their walled garden. So I can't exactly share out or I can't deploy the same tactics across all those platforms from any one client. And so I think that's where we need to move and get to some level of standardization where we can go across the entire entirety of a marketer's buy and entirety of a marketer's sort of technology deployment, which those are the areas that we struggle right now.
Yes, I'd say we were in the early stages, trying to collaborate more with other companies. And that's important because what we want are actionable solutions. It's not helpful if someone on the demand side says A, B, C about a particular campaign and someone on the sell side says D, E, F. What you want to be able to do is have a meaningful conversation, and not just a meaningful conversation so that at the end of the month when your bill comes through, then you can say, well, did this happen, didn't this happen, and you argue for 2 weeks, you reach some agreement, and then you get a refund. What you'd like to know is in flight that 15% of this particular inventory happens to be invalid inventory, and I know at the end of the month I'm not going to be charged for that. So that's the sort of level that we want of collaboration, where the buy side and the sell side and all the parties involved are going to have a meaningful way of discussing fraud and illegitimate inventory, so that when it comes to billing and reporting, there isn't this disagreement. We are very much at the early stages of that, and that's the sort of level that we'd like to get at.
So it sounds really cool, collaboration, in the same way that a utopia sounds really cool, to be honest.
Yes.
But the fact of the matter is, you all have different agendas within the advertising industry. You know, you're an independent, you're an independent provider. You're affiliated with Google, which I think has an AdExchange. So, you know, how do you kind of reconcile that, right? You've all got these different agendas, and while it's great you all want to fight against fraud, you all have different ways of going about doing that, and you know, one guy's signaling fraud might end up hurting an aspect of Google's business.
Specificity, I think, is the key thing. So in the first instance, there is a taxonomy of fraud, so and illegitimate inventory. So looking at scrapers, fraudulent arbitrage, where someone buys vanilla display inventory and repurposes that as video inventory, hidden ads, injected inventory. We have all these particular categories. In the first instance, when we're discussing a particular issue, what you'd like to know is, are we discussing the same issue? Then when it comes to malware actually going forward in terms of the specificity, what we'd like to know when someone says that this happens to be botnet traffic, then we'd like to know when you say it's botnet traffic, is this ZIS? Right. Is this SpyEye? Is this FleerCivit? What exactly are you talking about? And getting to that sort of level. From Google's perspective, we would like to be more open about that, and it is an initiative that we're looking to support, is being open about the particular malware families that we are addressing, and to be open to the point where we can help our peers address those. So if we happen to prioritize a particular malware family, and we happen to say that ZIS happens to be so many machines, this is the sort of impact that it's having on the publisher side, this is the sort of impact it's having on the buy side, then other companies can say, well, actually, that's a meaningful threat, and we need to start looking into that also.
John, from an agency side, how do you reconcile all of this?
Yeah, it's obviously complex, right? And it's complex and evolving, but you know, I think that, you know, depending upon, as marketers get more and more savvy with their own data, right, and their own privacy issues. I mean, we have, you know, clients such as a JP Chase or a Verizon Wireless that has, you know, millions of customers that come to their sites on a daily basis, and they have to be very protective. As soon as there's fraud within any one of the campaigns, and any one of those, you know, ads may show up on a pirated site, or you know, is fraudulent by itself. There's both the ad protection or the brand protection side of it, and then there's also the fact of, you know, they're not wanting to pay, right, for illegitimate, you know, ad inventory, and so evolving that process and then looking at sequential liability and looking at inventory procurement methods from all of these sort of players within that daisy chain, looking at how we move up the waterfall within private marketplaces. That's sort of the mixture of the ad tech that we're deploying with partners like you guys, but then also how we're looking at how we're procuring inventory with our overall investment, not just looking at programmatic in a silo, but how we look at our overall investment in those partners and get into more private marketplaces where there's less instances of this happening.
Did you have anything to add, Michael? Because my next question is for you anyway.
All right. Well, what I'd say is that we're seeing uneven evolution. So we have people who are starting to compete on quality now that that the buy side is getting informed. The fact is that no one can afford on the sell side to compete on quality if the buy side can't tell the difference. And today, we're in a transition period, but I think that where this shakes out is where the buy side has sophisticated abilities to hold the sell side to account and tell the difference between someone who's worked hard to get out ahead of this problem and someone who's doing the bare minimum.
Correct.
But right now, that distinction is not made easily at all. And as a result, we see some of the buy side shouldering the entire burden and saying, we as an agency, we're going to adopt a technology solution to block fraud ourselves, which is like, it's giving up your own buy side leverage. When you take on the responsibility to do blocking yourself, then you're telling the entire sell side, try everything against me, because there's no negative consequences, and sometimes you'll get through, and that's just free money. And that shifted incentives, I think, in actually a really dysfunctional way. But we're not seeing that across the board, and we are seeing across the past year, for instance, different sell-side organizations taking dramatically different levels of effort to improve. And what that means is that we're going to start seeing more competition on quality, and I think that that's great, because essentially all this bot traffic is because the market is not efficiently pricing. Since the fraudulent inventory fakes performance metrics, it's not getting priced to zero as it should in a well-functioning market. So all we really need to do is fix that, and then economic pressures will fix everything else.
What does the sell side still need to do in order to, to get to a place where you guys are more or less satisfied?
So I think no one will say to my face, well, Michael, Tiffany, we love the bots. They just fall straight to the bottom line. It's awesome. Everyone will say, we really care about quality. We're employing more people than anyone else to take care of this issue. And so we just have to look at consequences and results. And there really is a wide variation of results, because there's a wide variation of savviness on the part of the buy side. And those two things are not going to converge until we have much more global adoption of any kind of monitoring in this space. And we're just not there yet. Right now, it's very much on the boundaries. So I'm seeing everything from just remarkably aggressive zero tolerance policies where payments are linked to reputation in a way that strongly disincentivizes the hackers, to much more, let's say, superficial efforts. So I think that globally, we've just been squeezing the balloon. What I mean is, I don't think we're putting any of the major ad fraud operations out of business. They're just shifting from places that are getting better policed to the places that are being worse policed, at least right now.
One tool that the sell side, likes to use, they use, content referral vendors to, help kind of stimulate traffic. John, what effect does that have on the fraud problem, if any?
I mean, these guys are better versed to talk on the technical side of it. I think that, any of those referral partners, at least there's a hand raising, right, of the consumer, and there could be, bot ridden and things like that, but. Yeah, we don't see that. I think any publisher or the sell side that is buying inventory, right, or buying impressions, and that is one of the tactics that they're utilizing to deploy it, needs to be mindful of their inventory procurement, right? As programmatic grows and you get into discrete segments on a marketer-by-marketer basis that has multiple, discrete segments, driving scale is what the supply side wants to do, and that's why they're buying all this inventory, right? And that's why they're trying to scale against all those segments so they can maximize the money that they're getting, but the audience quality is not always there because of their procurement methods. The referral sites tend to be, at least from what we see, a little bit better or up the chain as far as it being fraudulent or not. Again, from a tech stack standpoint, I can't speak to it as much.
How about you, Doug? Can you talk about it from a tech stack standpoint?
I think the two questions. Anyone who's supplying inventory should really stand by that inventory. So I think there is some responsibility, whether you're a referral service or whether you're an ad network or an exchange. If you happen to be supplying inventory, then you should be taking responsibility for the inventory that you sell. I don't think that's how it is today. What actually counts as taking responsibility? Again, I don't think we have, as an industry, what is best practice when it comes to policing the inventory that's sold. These are standards that I think will be established. It's something that people are thinking about going forward. But I would say that the traffic referral services are no different really to an ad network. When it actually comes to the technology, they do present different problems. So if there happens to be a network of sites that are all connected via some particular referral service, we're talking today about Outbrain and Taboola, then one of the problems is if someone in that network is buying automated traffic, and that automated traffic happens to be following links and is indiscriminate about the links that it follows, that means that there are high-quality sites that also end up with this traffic. So it is a slightly different problem to the ad network problem, where there is just a funnel. When you do have networks of sites, it only requires a handful of bad publishers within that network to pollute the whole system. And that's an issue that I think referral services have to deal with in a way that ad networks probably do not.
Yeah, I'll put it this way. When we find bots on premium name brand websites as part of a direct buy, it's not because they're running a botnet out of the back room, right? They're getting that bot traffic from someone else, and it's probably because they're paying for it, and they're probably paying on a volume basis, a performance basis. So just as I was saying before, different providers are taking radically different approaches to the degree to which they're pruning their own inventory. And if you're getting from a good one, then great, you're growing an engaged audience. And if you're not, then you're putting your entire brand reputation at risk.
Yep.
So we look at, sorry, were you going to
I
add
was
something?
going to say, actually tying back to what can the supply side do, and this is a point that I was bringing up earlier. If we have persistent identifiers for people who supply inventory, so that happens to be a publisher or any particular middleman, then what you can establish is persistent trust. So if you're a good actor in the system, if you're a good publisher or you're a good middleman, then after a while, if people are buying from you, and there is this collaborative layer on top on the demand side, if everyone on the demand side says that a particular actor is a good actor, then that's great. And if everyone on the demand side or a handful of sophisticated people on the demand side identify that someone happens to be a bad actor and that bad actor gets punished within the system, then we're in a good place. Today, that persistent identifier doesn't exist, so you're not punished for doing bad things and you're not rewarded for doing good things. So I think one of the key things is actually just having persistent identifiers. At that point, we can then actually separate out three classes of actors. There are people who are definitely good actors, and there are people who are definitely bad actors, and then there are people who sit in the middle. There are people who maybe do not have the tech wherewithal, they do not have the resources to be able to police in the way that, for example, Google can police, and it's not their fault. These people want to do good things, and if they are being punished, then at least they can engage in proper dialogue with others in the ecosystem to address what is a problem, because potentially they're sourcing traffic from someone they thought was a good supplier of traffic, but it turns out that person isn't a good supplier. Unless we have these persistent identifiers and the people who are getting punished or rewarded can actually engage with others in the ecosystem, I don't think we're going to be in a good place. And that's the transition that I think is being made now.
Let's talk a little bit about persistent identifiers, since they seem pretty important. What are the challenges in leveraging them?
So we're referring to blacklists in particular?
Yeah.
So there are many categories of illegitimate and fraudulent traffic that can be addressed through blacklists. If there is a persistent identifier for an actor, so this actor happens to be supplying fraudulent arbitrage, so selling video inventory that happens to be repurposed display inventory that they bought in some other exchange. This particular party happens to be selling injected inventory. Potentially, this particular party happens to have scrapers being run on their site that they are potentially running in their back garden. These particular actors can then be blacklisted. And the nice thing about having a persistent identifier is if you are receiving money within this ecosystem, so potentially you're a publisher, you can be booted out. The downside of blacklists is whilst they pick out bad actors in some bad slices of traffic, so for example, data center traffic, you can pick out this traffic happens to be coming from Google Compute Engine or Amazon Web Services. You can actually filter that out, and that does persist. But what happens if someone's machine has been hijacked? It's a residential machine or a corporate machine. The machine has been hijacked. It's controlled remotely by some attacker. And The problem that you have there is that the identifier that you'd have to try block this particular person, maybe they're sitting behind an ISP like AOL. There are thousands of people who have the same IP. If this particular user, this malware, happens to discard cookies repeatedly, it would be very difficult to block that particular IP using any particular blacklist. Worse, if you put the blacklist out, the attackers happen to read the blacklist, it would be foolish not to, and respond immediately. So and this is what we're talking about in terms of raising the bar. There are many attacks that we can address using these collaborative industry-wide blacklists. The step then in terms of disclosing information that Google would like to about malware is to be precise about the type of malware, the type of botnet. So this happens to be an infection. There are a million machines with some particular malware binary running across these million machines. And we can provide enough information so that potentially Michael's team can say, hey, this is interesting. I need to go come up with my own solution. Because I can't give him a solution. I can't give him a blacklist, because that blacklist then gets used by the bad guys. But I can give him enough information that he can develop his own solution. So we've raised the bar to the point where those who can actually deliver value and can come up with their solutions for these sophisticated problems can do that.
You've been nodding your head throughout, so I'm guessing you're down with that.
We're looking forward to the establishment of essentially trusted distribution mechanisms by which we can get more of this kind of actionable intelligence out there. Just this is a personal preference as a business leader. I don't want to just have what is in effect a secret list that I sell copies of over and over and over again. That's a boring, stupid sounding business. So what we want to be doing is the hard stuff, which is running the ongoing arms race with the bad guys, where we're responding to adaptation. We're not just selling another copy of information that we've jealously guarded since last year. So if we can establish some protocols by which we can get more of this information just out to everyone, I think it's going to have an economic effect on at least some of the botnet operators. At least we can raise the cost of operation. I for one think that successful botnets doing ad fraud today out of data center IP addresses is just obscene. I can't believe that that's not a solved problem yet. What we showed in the ANA study is that approximately 2/3 of the ad fraud that we saw came from compromised regular people's computers, which is a remarkable finding. But another way to put it is that 1/3 of that fraud probably should have just been caught by anybody who was looking at an ARIN database and saying, gosh, why are we serving so many ads to an EC2 cluster? Right? So purging that from the ecosystem broadly is some low-hanging fruit that I'm looking forward to taking care of.
So even if there is total collaboration between the different vendors, there's still a bunch of different vendor solutions fighting ad fraud. So John, what do you do when you've got different solutions kind of giving you different assessments on traffic quality?
We definitely, it's our job to review the entire marketplace and put them through a continual review process, scorecard, and establish what is the best solution for any one of our clients, which is not always going to be the same. It's not like we're just going to choose and say white ops is the only thing that we deploy across every single client. Sorry, Michael. But it is our job to stay on top of their product pipeline and what they're doing to stay ahead of fraud, and in what instances in clients that are sitting on a spectrum of who is more sophisticated and going to be playing in these places where they need to deploy a different type of ad tech, and what is that right solution for them. And so it's a continual sort of recertification process that we go through on a month-by-month basis, that we constantly relook at the platforms and the ad tech partners that we're working with and see what they're doing in their product development pipeline to understand where they're going to be, not just today, but where they're going to be 3 months from today.
Another question for you, John. Michael had earlier mentioned developing actionable solutions. When you look at what's out there today, what do you feel still needs to be developed?
I think we're all active participants, right? Everybody has a role in this, right? So if we really want to solve it, it is understanding it's not just the marketer or the ad agency employing the ad tech, right? It's all sides of the equation that we need to solve the issue with. And I think that's what we're faced with, is how everybody has a responsibility, within the industry, and that's why things like the IAB and so on and so forth, to help solve this issue, because it's only going to continue to grow, right? The hackers are only going to follow where the dollars are flowing, right? That's how they're going to make their money. And so I think we as an industry do need to look at all sides of the equation, the demand side and the supply side, to help solve this issue and help. It's going to be a continual thing, because there's always going to be hackers, there's always going to be fraud. And so it's more or less, yes, there's going to be sharing, but then there's going to be disintermediation, certain levels of how much we can share. But there should be standards that are set and that we can set as a baseline and foundational elements that we can build upon.
Michael, Douglas, in terms of actionable solutions, what do you guys hope to kind of develop, maybe a year from now?
Well, I am trying to aim at convergence. I think that anyone today can find some ad fraud. Anyone armed with Excel and a sufficient amount of data can start looking for anomalies and going, wow, that really doesn't make any sense. Because the bad guys don't necessarily get together and compare notes. Some of them are super brilliant and some are actually kind of stupid. And you can find the stupid guys fairly trivially. So today, there's a lot of effort that's essentially analytical effort looking for anomalies and saying, look, I find fraud. In fact, I'm gonna package my anomaly detection as a product. And I think it's going to be just outrageously unfair to the sell side of this industry, the people who are spending countless dollars engaging with a real human audience, if they have to pay for 20 different vendors to sign off on their traffic because they can't anticipate which buyer is going to use which thing at radically different quality levels. Radically different. The White Ops approach is one where we're doing hardcore malware reverse engineering and then connecting that to traffic that we catch online. It's a very technical cybersecurity challenge. And it's fundamentally different than just saying, well, this is incredibly suspicious. So I'm hoping that we avoid a balkanized future that just imposes some kind of outrageous tax on the entire industry because everyone has to employ this multitude of vendors. I'm not entirely sure how we get there. Right now, there's no referee, there's no MRC accreditation even, though we're getting there, and I'm expecting one soon. But still, we think a kind of first-class feature of the collaboration that we're trying to foment in this industry is one where there can be broad agreement that gets down to the brass tacks of financial transactions so that we can simply financially transact on a number that feels fair to both sides without just an outrageous number of vendors piling on.
Douglas, your take?
Yes, I would say the advances that we're making now, I think, as an industry in terms of collaboration is really the key thing. What we don't want is to have many parties coming in and having ad hoc solutions. I think there are enough parties that are sophisticated enough, established companies, newer companies like White Ops, and for these companies to come together. It is already happening now for us to discuss what are the key pains. There are many pains that are felt by marketers today. There are pains that are felt on the supply side and the demand side that aren't actually really pains. They shouldn't be pains. It just so happens that people didn't really, if we think about the RTB exchanges, they're actually relatively new. And when you create these RTB exchanges, when they were created not so long ago, and these were startups, the thought was not to try protect something. You don't protect something that you don't have. The first thing is, I'm going to grow this ecosystem. I'm going to grow the exchange inventory world. We've now reached a point where this actually is mature. People have realized there is real value in programmatic. And having got to this particular point, the thought is now, how do we actually secure this transaction? We've spoken before about a viewable currency. We're now at a stage where it's actually thinking about how is it that we can ensure that people are getting what they pay for. And the changes that I think are going to be made in terms of persistent identifiers, in terms of collaborative blacklists, these are the sorts of things that I think will raise the bar where people today are making noise about things that aren't actually issues, or certainly they shouldn't be issues. So in a couple of years, hopefully it's sooner than that, we'll be in a world where that is no longer an issue, and then actually we can start talking about the fine details. I would like to be able to talk to Michael about when we happen to be doing analysis of automated analysis of 1 million plus malware binaries in a day, and we happen to then break those down and say, these are the interesting ones, these are not the interesting ones, and be able to talk to Michael about those particular threats. We don't yet know how we're going to do that. That's the sort of discussion I would like to have, not have a discussion about traffic that's coming from Amazon Web Services, because that isn't a really interesting discussion.
Exactly.
You guys have a tentative timeline for when you envision that happening?
These are big tankers, these companies. It's going to take, I would like to think quickly. We are moving quickly. There is, I think this momentum is certainly building. I think there is a willingness to move in a way that a couple of years ago there wasn't. And companies that probably would never have thought of actually collaborating are now thinking, actually, this is interesting. We can do something about this, and we should do something about this because it isn't in Google's interest to develop the best solution. What we would like is that the whole industry, the bar is raised. This shouldn't be a problem for anyone. We would like the whole pie is grown. Programmatic is interesting, and people realize that there is real value, and that isn't disputed. And that isn't just in our interest, that's in the interest of every major player, of agencies, on the supply side, on the demand side. That's the world I like to be in.
So, John, will we realize this world in 2 years, 5 years, or even longer?
That's a tough thing, right? I think that, to everything that was said on both sides of me, I don't speak in binary code like these two do or anything like that. So, like I said earlier, the more inventory that becomes available to marketers in a programmatic fashion, the more and more marketers get comfortable with data-informed portions of their buying, the bigger the issue becomes, right? And the bigger the need to get there more quickly. I think where we get in 6 to 12 months will be very different than where we need to be in 24 months, right? So it's an ongoing evolution of how we need to get there. And unfortunately, there is not going to be any sort of one-size-fits-all. It's going to be patchwork. Right? There's going to be a patchwork of ways that we work together to help sort of evolve the industry overall. Because, I mean, if you look at any sort of digital measurement, and you look at any sort of standardization that we try to get even in ad sizes and things like that, there are new platforms and new technology that come out that switch all that up, right? And takes away that standardization. And the same thing is going to exist in this space. So it's more about the continual evolution of what we're doing to overall improve upon the marketer's outcome.
And I was going to ask you, Michael, about timeline, but instead I'm going to ask you, what is the one thing above all that will help facilitate the vision that you guys just articulated?
Oh, it's the buy-side budgeting for security. Like I've seen this play out across several different corporate departments now. The story of getting on the internet is it's some new department in American enterprise says we could use the internet, and then they go out on the internet, and then a year later they're like, oh my God, this is horrible. We've been robbed in ways that we've never seen before. Because little things like jurisdiction, which we take for granted, doesn't actually apply online. There's no one out there to protect you. You have to protect yourself. And that's unusual. That's not how it normally works in the rest of society, that you have to pay for your own security. And this is a pattern that's now playing out under the CMO's office. So we thought someone else could pay for this, and the answer is no. Actually, no, there's nobody. So it's nice we've generated a certain amount of momentum, but broad buy-side adoption is still very low, which means that buying decisions are not taking into account the rapid malfeasance in this space. And you don't have to pay a lot of money, but you have to pay enough that you're keeping up, because that's what creates the incentive for the sell side to actually innovate and compete on quality. So that is by far the #1 predictor of success.
And you got to remember, these budgets didn't exist, right? You used to have working media and non-working media, right? So you had your creative and your media, right? You didn't have to worry about how much ad tech I'm going to need to deploy on top of my media CPM in order to make sure that it's actually viewable, right? And so to your point in the CMO's office, where that gets funded from and how people budget for that and how you have that on an ongoing basis that you can't exactly forecast against becomes one of the issues that we need to deal with going forward.
Michael, John, Douglas, thank you very much. And the rest of you, I guess I'll see you at happy hour.
All right.